How volatile is all of this in terms of the rest of the world?
Very. Just to pick out one of the capitals there, Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires has a considerable Jewish community, and we have just heard on your roundup there are pro-Palestinian demonstrations. There are interfaces, and I think that where the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is right to warn about this. Very strong pro-Palestinian movement in the student population, and it could be real trouble. And that's why it's very interesting that the big leaders of Europe, including UK, have got together and said, look, we must defend the right of the Israeli people for self-defense. And this is what it's about. It's almost that the human rights industry at one end has looked at the pro-Palestinian thing, the grievances of the Palestinian population, and they haven't been treated well. That must be said. But in no way do I want to share things out, given the atrocities that occurred over the weekend. But, Eamon and Isabel, it is very difficult as an analyst, as a reporter who's reported from these places, to stand in the middle ground on this one. We are looking at something that, sociologists describe as a wicked problem, a problem with no obvious solution. The problem of the impacted Palestinian populations, their continuing resentment, and the Israelis who have come and settled this land, whose independence as a state was guaranteed from 1948 on.
How do those Palestinians end up in Gaza? We'll see a map here of where Gaza is, and this tiny bit of land with a population of 2 million.
2.3
and it's going up
there. When I started working there, it was under 500,000.
But why do people choose to be there?
Not really. It's necessity. It has always been very particular. It's very particular if you go back to the Old Testament and the Bible. Goliath, I think, came from Gaza, and they're always seen as somewhat different. And it has always been a hot potato since the wars of Israeli independence began in 47-48, that Israel, after the 67 war, wanted to share it out with Egypt. One of the founders of Israel said that it's almost like the other side of the moon. It is so difficult. One thing that we must stress, given that they're talking about a state of siege, it's in a more or less a state of siege anyway. Environmentally, it's extremely challenged. The natural sources of fresh water have been running out. Sewage has been regularly in the streets. And the people who expressed greater sympathy to me recently being there, I mean, it's about 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, was in one of those very kibbutz opposite. They were aware of what's going on and had a lot of sympathy. But now, how you've got this absolutely toxic mix of this completely unexpected commando attack on the Israeli people, as it turned out.
It's interesting you talk about the reaction around the world, and just to give this a kind of GB focus, we were hearing yesterday from the chief rabbi in the UK saying it's hard to find a Jewish family in this country that haven't been touched by this tragedy, this massacre. We hear about people being burned to death in kibbutzes in parts of Israel over the weekend. But the reaction was very strong from Palestinian supporters, people who were out on the streets last night outside the Israeli embassy, the likes of which I don't think I've ever seen in this country.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think it goes on from what I was saying, that it's a cycle of revenge and retribution. And this is why it is absolutely going nowhere. We look at the Telegraph headline, Israel, no choice but to seize Gaza. Actually, even given the size, Israel itself is a relatively small country. It's very interesting.
Size of Wales.
I've just had a correspondence on WhatsApp with a good friend there in journalism, and he was saying, no, my family is safe. But we know 5 families that have lost loved ones or have had loved ones kidnapped. It is so small. It is so impacted. There's a call out of 300,000 of reservists. But can they really hold Gaza? What do they do?
So is this an incursion into Gaza from Israel? Is that what they're planning?
Yeah.
Are they planning an invasion?
I can't second guess them, because this has a very unhappy history. Gaza regained independence from Israeli occupation because they didn't want to go near it in 2005, 2006, and they had the election. There have been 4 This is the 5th major military operation. They have gone badly. Israeli troops do not like being on the ground in Gaza. It is alien territory, and they cannot hold it. And the idea that, you can drive the Palestinians out, and Mr. Netanyahu said, everybody should leave. But where? Where do they go? Yeah. The Mediterranean Sea. I'm not being facetious, because the obvious way out is the south into Egypt. Egypt doesn't want them.
The First Minister of Scotland, Hamza Youssef, his in-laws are trapped there. They would like to see their parents there, and now they can't get out. They can't.
It's always been the problem, been a big problem.
Yeah. So how do you get in and out of Gaza?
Well, this is part of the big question, isn't it? How on earth they got all that weaponry, all that intelligence, all that ability to launch that kind of attack when they have been occupied for so long. And, I suppose the question with the siege, I thought it was really interesting what Antonio Guterres from the United Nations said yesterday. Really careful diplomatic language, saying that he recognised the legitimate grievances of the Palestinians, and he also recognised Israel's security concerns, but reminded Israel that military operations must be conducted in strict accordance with international and humanitarian law. I mean, he was walking on eggshells, wasn't he? But you can see why. But that is the point about Gaza. I mean, how on earth were those materials getting in and out?
Well, that's the thing, and they did it. And there's now an accusation of the Israelis that a lot of it was happening hidden in plain sight. One of the things that I was struck, you've asked me about 3 or 4 questions, which I'd love to answer, but I don't think we've got time. But on this, what was so interesting, seeing a lot of those young men who were pumped up, they had looked as if they had done a lot of bodybuilding. They were commando trained. Commando trained at least 1,000, possibly thousands. How did that happen? And there must have been professional training as well as the materiel. They make a lot themselves. That's one of the things that they learn how to do, and they smuggle it in parts, usually through the tunnels, but they've managed to get it in. The problem that has been so toxic, too, is that they've been under a dictatorship of Hamas. Hamas got elected into power in 2006 and has never shown any sign that it wants to give it up. Have an election all over again. It's the same on the West Bank with a different Palestinian authority of Fatah under Mahmoud Abbas. They talk about democracy, but they're pretty averse to carrying it out.
When you come back, I'm very keen to find out I suppose the grip, the grasp, the influence that Russia or China would have on all of this, and what world reaction would be against all of that. So
Russia, China, Iran and the Arabs. We've got to talk about that. But I would like to answer your question when I come back about access. Only 7 or 8 access points, and only 2 used mainstream in and out. And the Gazans wanted to do it because actually they wanted to go to Israel to earn money.
So complicated, so complicated. Robert, really appreciate your analysis.